What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode. Hey, I've got Atticus LeBlanc on, CEO of the largest co-living company in America. And hey, this is a chance for you to get into the brain of someone who has done absolutely amazing things in the real estate, but specifically we go deep in the co-living space. So, we talk a little bit about inspiration. We talk a little bit about legalities of co-living. We go into, how he started Padsplit and what this whole big company that he's created. Now, I asked him, back when he was closer to that 4,000 rooms, I said, how much is the company worth? He said $110 million. So I'm sure now he's probably my guess would be north of a $200 million company that this guy has founded and created. That is not the type of person you get to talk with just every day on the street. This is a special interview, special guy who's on a mission to solve affordable housing. In my mind, sometimes we get a little philosophical in the episode, so just push past that, but just listen to this. And my question is, one of the things I was going to talk to him about was ground up construction of co-living. And I didn't get a chance to talk to him. And so I'm so disappointed about that. If you want him back to talk about ground up construction of co-living, then you got to comment or share this. Give us a share anyway, but give us a comment letting me know that you want me to get him back, and I'll work on getting him back. All right. God bless you. Thank you, guys. Enjoy the episode. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Scale Your Real Estate. We have the one and only, in our space, this guy really needs no introduction. I'm so honored and grateful to have you on, Atticus. This is Atticus LeBlanc. He's the CEO and founder of Padsplit, one of the, if not the largest co-living company in America right now. Can I say that? Is it the largest co-living company by room count?
At least from a marketplace perspective, that's probably fair to say. We were actually just going over this today. But yeah, we're at a little over 6,700 units right now. So, it's crazy to me that at 6,700s we could be the biggest. Right. But at least for dedicated co-living marketplaces, it seems to be the case.
That's awesome, man. Big congrats on that. And the last time I talked to you, by the way, I think you were closer to 4,500. Like, I remember asking you specifically, like, how many rooms you're at. And this is not that long ago. You were like at 4,500, maybe it was 5,000. But like, that's a significant jump.
Yeah, I always say when people ask like, what's the end goal you want to do with this thing, and for me, it's always been if the gap in housing units is 7.5 million, I think we have to be in the millions in order to really say, all right, we have effectively scaled and we're there.
Right. Yeah, that's a beautiful vision, man. So the other thing I was going to say, just to introduce you, I know we're diving into it already. I love it. It's just that you have a mission. It's a personal mission, but it's Padsplit's mission to solve affordable housing. And I can confirm that 7.5 million number because I was literally just Googling it earlier today, looking at all these sites because I'm on a webinar later tonight where I have to talk about that. And so I was like, it is 7.5 million. That's a lot.
It's a big number. Yeah. I mean, especially it depends what income range you're talking about as well. And so like you have two issues. You've got supply on one side and then access on the other. And do the individuals who need a place to be able to live have access to that existing supply? And if it's a vacation home, or if somebody has 4 vacation homes that are just vacant most of the year, then the answer is no. They can't really. It's great that it exists, but it's not accessible to anyone. But then on the other side, which is much more common, is like, okay, well, if you start thinking about income requirements with skyrocketing rents and wage growth remaining relatively stagnant, or at least compared with things like rent growth or home appreciation, you have this widening gap. And if you're looking at 3 times monthly rent as an income requirement, well, then more and more people are going to get locked out of that access equation. If you think about the same thing relative to first month's rent being a minimum requirement, if you think about FICO scores, like there these key elements that really prevent access to a lot of essential workers all around the country that we see and we benefit from every day. And so the real question is, how do you create good supply and make up that 7.5 million gap where it really exists for the essential workers or folks that are below a certain income threshold?
Yeah. No, that's a valuable point. So when we hear in the news, I'm so glad you brought this up. So when we hear in the news, like the wealth gap, right? That, I mean, I want the listeners to understand that is exactly, it is expenses rising and incomes not keeping up with that, right? to a large extent, that's a piece of it. That's not the whole wealth gap, but that's a piece of it. Is like, hey, income for the majority of earners is not keeping up with costs.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, and that's been a trend for a long, long time. I mean, at least as long as I've been alive.
Yeah. So when people ask, like, how does this actually work? Like, who's actually buying these homes? It's those people that are getting priced out of the market.
Yeah, I mean, in our scenario, usually people are renting, but we've absolutely seen some individuals that, and my favorite stories, candidly, are the ones where you see people go full cycle, where they were in an unstable housing situation, potentially confronting homelessness, were in a room, found stability, found uh, the the ability to start saving money and building credit over time, and then in some cases either started their own businesses, moved in their own apartments. And we have, over a dozen now folks that have actually gone and purchased their own properties, and so that's been really cool to see that cycle. And in one case, my first ever hire, this guy kind of went through that cycle, bought a house, trained another person to buy her house. Then he moved out and it became an investment property for him, did it again. And like, it's just the stuff that you love to see as an entrepreneur. It's just, all right, like, you built something, it is good. And at least for a lot of people, it's working well.
That's a beautiful story, man. And I've always loved that about you. I remember our first conversation. It's building this company is not just about the money for you. It's not just about building something that's successful. To you, I think there's a definition of success. Maybe you could speak to this more. That is truly solving problems, right? And helping solve the affordable housing. So that's a great segue into just like, how did you get started in co-living? And then we'll come back to the mission side of things. But how did you get started in co-living? How did you stumble into this? And what made you to make the crazy decision to go all in and build the largest co-living company?
Well, I think your propensity to absorb risks just comes through practice, like anything else. And you find yourself in a situation where your back is up against the wall, and you don't really have a choice, but you have to find a way forward. And it wasn't really different for me. I fell into this I'd say the journey started there in 2007. I went broke in 2007. I was a commercial real estate broker, had 3 big deals, was going to make over $700,000 that year. I was like, man, I am just flying. And my first son was born. My wife told me she was going to stop working. And within 3 weeks, all my deals failed. And I made a total of $10,000 in 2007. So yeah, you go from high highs to low lows. And I just happened to be looking at homes that I could purchase for under $50,000. And that was because I had a line of credit on my personal home that I had bought out of foreclosure 4 years prior, and had been fortunate enough to kind of get some equity in that run up of values. And there were 1,200 houses inside the perimeter of Atlanta that were available under $50,000, and no reason that I could ascertain that they should be, and no one could tell me why they were that. But in getting to know a lot of these neighborhoods and determining, wait a second, this is a massive opportunity. I should go invest whatever money I have, roll the dice again, and just double down. I started seeing these things that were called rooming houses that were all over the place, and had never heard of them. And there happened to be one next door to one of the houses that I purchased. And when the tenant moved out of that house in early 2009, 2 guys that were in the home said, "Hey, can we come rent rooms from you?" And I did the math and realized, like, wait a second. Number one, you have federally guaranteed income via Social Security income, but they did not qualify for Section 8 or Housing Choice Voucher programs. They had been living in this absolutely deplorable house, tarp on the roof, no heating and air conditioning. And this is Atlanta, mind you. So it was hot. It gets hot and it gets cold. And they walked me through, hey, here's what you need to do. And here's how here's what we need from you. And here's what we can pay. And I realized, well, you don't qualify for even the worst apartment in 2009 in the depths of the recession for anything, anywhere. in the worst parts of town, but I can create a quality environment, and I'm going to make more money renting to these individuals who could otherwise not afford an apartment on their own anywhere, uh, and I can create a better product. And so that was '09, and over the next 8 years, as I was building up that business, where we kind of rolled the dice again and again and started taking out lots of personal guarantees, 100% loans, 16% interest, but built a sustainable business. I realized this rooming house, shared housing model, whatever you want to call it, this was far before the term co-living ever existed. This is better. It's a lot of work. It was certainly more work than anything else we were doing, but it was also much more profitable. You had, and I think what a lot of people don't recognize or don't appreciate about co-living, they think, oh, well, it's more money. But one of the biggest impacts is turn costs and vacancy costs. And just when you have a single family rental turn where the tenant moves out, the cost to go back and re-renovate that house can be in the tens of thousands of dollars. Uh, even if it's a good turn and someone left the place in good shape, chances are you're still painting, you're still replacing carpet, and it gets really expensive really quickly. And then you lose all the money when that home is completely vacant, and forego the opportunity cost of having the income for when that home was actually generating something. Well, in co-living, you don't have that, and as you know, like, your cost to turn a room is usually less than $100 to go in and make ready for the next person. And in our case, I think one of the major benefits that we've been able to do with Padsplit is just to be able to refill that room really quickly and to aggregate demand across income segments, because we're getting just an insane number of eyeballs every month. I think we're 150,000, over 150,000 unique visitors a month. There are 650,000 plus unique searches on the site every month. So, yeah, it's been a wild ride. But to get your point, like, how I recognize that this was a superior solution, and that if there were a services business that effectively took that operational pain out of the business, then lots of real estate investors and even homeowners, frankly, around the country could leverage this solution to create more housing opportunities for people that need them and deserve them, frankly.
Yes. So you saw the cash flow, which I talk about a lot on this podcast. It's like, it's great. But then you realized, okay, it's a lot of additional work. And then, just like a true entrepreneur, you're like, what if I could take all that additional work off of someone's plate and allow them to have the additional cash flow? Like, this is the greatest solution for investors, right? This is why I was excited to interview you. Hey, I want to commend you on something, man, because a lot of people let struggles. This is not the theme of this podcast, but it's funny because most of the guests I have on, there's some sort of theme around this, and that is that your strength came from one of your from one of your biggest struggles. Right. Like, and I think that that's just I just think that's a beautiful thing, because a lot of people, you go through life, you're an investor, you take risks, and similar things could have happened to anybody else and it could have crushed them. Right. And they could have gotten back on their feet 10 years later. And yet here you are 10 plus years later, and you've built something really beautiful. So, part of the reason I host this podcast is just to be stories like yours, to be an inspiration for other people, because there's crazy life events out there, right? Especially now, the economy is not as popping as it used to be, and so I just want to thank you for sharing that story. I think that's really beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely, Sam. I mean, listen, I need to listen to a lot of those stories too. This
podcast will go live in a few months.
Yeah, the struggle doesn't end, which is maybe just a nasty surprise. You think, okay, well, you grow, you scale, and it gets easier, right? The answer is hell no. There's this Picasso quote that the older you get, the stronger the wind blows, and it's always in your face. And it's totally true. Just whether you're dealing with massive cash flow issues, hiring, firing, layoffs, getting bigger no's, bigger failures. The successes are never really what, I mean, at least for me, you don't really think about them at the time. All of the losses, I'm one of those people who hates to lose, and you, every time you get a loss, or if you can't convert 100% of people to being in favor of the product, it ticks you off, and at the end of the day, like, and I've had, I mean, lower moments than that, and you see a lot of them, and I think it's just important to be vulnerable and self aware, because we all recognize, even when we meet our heroes, like, everybody's human, and everybody puts their pants on, everybody needs to eat ice cream or whatever every once in a while, and have a cheat day. And everybody goes through struggles, but yeah, I mean, when I tell some of those stories, I think back to something my mom told me, which was just, don't you ever feel sorry for yourself, and at the end of the day, you can just pick yourself up and put one foot in front of the other.
Yeah. That was how you started this call, by the way. I don't know if that first part will make it in the recording or not, but you said
it's true. It's true.
You said one foot in front of the other. That's how we started. Man, I'll say this too, and then we'll get back to the nitty gritty, but it's to be expected somewhat, because when I think about you, and I think about you often in a non-weird way, I just think about you and what you're doing and what you're out to accomplish. And it's really inspiring for me. I mean, it really is an encouragement to me in what I'm doing. But I also think about you went up against a giant, bro. You didn't try to let's have 1,000 units in Atlanta. You said, let's solve affordable housing. So you are fighting a worthy opponent, and it's not going to go down without a fight. So, yeah. I don't want to say you brought it on yourself, but I'm freaking inspired every day, because you're out there with a mission, really truly doing it. And I hope the listeners take that away, is the bigger your opponent, the bigger your battles, and you've gone after it, and it's inspiring so many people. I know people in my community, man, even after the last time we had you on to speak, it was just whoa, you think at a different level, you have a different vision, you have a different mission, and it's big and it's huge, and it's impacting lots of people. So thank you. I
appreciate it. And, yeah, I hope so. And I hope we can do some good. I mean, it's one of the reasons why, in spite of the wind blowing harder in our faces, that just, the reason you keep going is because every once in a while you'll get a review from somebody you don't know, you've never met, and they're just being honest about how this changed their life for the better. You're like, that's pretty cool. And to know that impact likely would not have existed beforehand. Those are the reasons that you keep going, because I think there's a limit to how much money gives you happiness, and I know for me personally, as soon as I got to a point in my career where I felt like, all right, my kids are taken care of, and I'm not worried about my kids or my wife, that was kind of it, right? I mean, everybody likes to win, but aside from that, it's not enough to really continue to drive you. And so, what are those things that are really just going to drive you to keep making the sacrifice over and over again? And I think it's got to be bigger than you in order to make it a worthy goal, and just to keep you going.
Yeah. I talk a lot about being a social entrepreneur, which I know is something you hold yourself to too, which is just, let's all do well, and let's do it by doing good. I've heard that on one of your podcasts that you've shared. So speaking of that, that's a great segue into, you mentioned that some of your first tenants were eligible to pay their rent through their Social Security income, but they were not eligible to pay it through housing choice vouchers, right? These HCV vouchers, or these. Yeah. So, however, I also know that you've done some work, because people ask me all the time, well, what does HUD think of this? Or what does the government think of this? Or how do they view co-living? And others, we'll get into the regulations question in a little bit, but I'd love for you to kind of tell what you've done at a federal level to promote co-living. I know you were a big part of getting a recommendation from HUD, and I'd love for you to kind of tell that story, and then just share the recommendation that they did make. I share it all the time, and I always give you and your team credit when I share it. But I'd love for that story to be told on here.
Yeah. I think there are really only two weapons, if you will, in our arsenal to kind of fight the policy battle. One is you have these anecdotal stories of transformational life impacts from these individuals who, but for this opportunity, would not have been able to make that change, would not have been able to move out of homelessness into housing, even though they were working full time, would not have been able to get their own apartment, start their own business, get their own house, whatever, buy a car. And then the other one is the data, right? And at this point, we've had well over 15,000 stays, and of course, we're tracking incomes of those individuals. We're surveying them for, hey, what were you doing before? How much money are you saving each month because of the solution? We report all on-time payments to the credit bureaus, so we can see what their change in FICO score is. Generally, we're tied into their, I won't say bank account, because a lot of them are unbanked or underbanked. They're still using prepaid debits. So we're tied into a lot of that card activity, and you can see what they've been spending on before, what they're spending on now, and in some cases, what they spend on later. And so, like, tracking all of that data and those use cases, you can start to demonstrate pretty clearly how you are creating measurable impact. And whether it is the average member saving $330 a month, or moving someone closer to their ailing grandmother, their grandson, their new job, people who are able to move from one location or one city to another because of a job change, or just something that they always, kind of a life change that they always wanted to make but didn't feel like they had the ability to. And so you can kind of track these things on both an anecdotal level and on a macro level. And occasionally people listen, right? And that was one of those circumstances where we were invited by HUD to present on some of the data. And I mean, some of it's pretty obvious, though, right? Like this, we talked about the supply question, and there are enough bedrooms in most of our metropolitan areas to house every homeless person, like today. And there are enough empty bedrooms to house virtually everyone who is struggling to afford their home today. Like those options exist. It's simple mathematical equation. And so I think that's probably pretty attractive to policymakers who recognize, okay, well, if we're talking about 7.5 million homes shortage, and then you look at what it costs to build a new apartment, or at least to subsidize a new apartment, I mean, you're talking about $4+ trillion just to create the housing. Forget about the cost to actually subsidize the ongoing rental amounts where there may be a gap between what someone can afford and what the market rate is to run that unit. And so anyone who just looks at the simple math can start to recognize this doesn't work. Like we do not have within the traditional set of government tools, whether that is low-income housing tax credits or housing choice vouchers, or traditional social housing programs, you don't have enough tools to get there. And even if you did have the funding, you don't have the staff to implement it. And more importantly, you don't have the time. If you look at the number of units that have been created over the last 30 years by low-income housing tax credits, it's only 106,000 units a year. Okay, well, 7.5 million. Yeah, I'm not that good at math, but I know that that's a really long time for people who need a place to live today. And so that's really what boggles the mind for me from a lot of our critics on the policy side, is like, okay, like I've seen and explored almost every solution there is, and I've tested most of them. You tell me your solution. If you've got one, if you've got something better, like, let's roll, go do it. But at the end of the day, it's like, oh, well, that's not my expertise. I'm not supposed to solve it. Somebody else is going to solve it, or we just need more money. And for me, it's like, if you're not willing to put your time, forget about your money, put your time where your mouth is and actually go out there and take some action, then just get out of the way.
Love it. So you presented on this data to HUD, and then what happened? So you got invited. Did you have to lobby for that, or was that just an invitation?
Yeah,
I thought
this was we were still relatively small at the time. We were feisty, at least, I guess. But there was an invitation to a couple of co-living companies to come in and present. And at one point, just prior to that, I had been on the Hill with one of our nonprofit partners who's based in DC, and they had introduced us to a couple of staffers. But yeah, we got that invitation, and evidently somebody went up the right flagpole, and they set up a meeting. Interestingly, I did not attend. I didn't realize how big a deal it was going to be. But the secretary was there. This was Secretary Carson at the time, and we have this picture of our then COO, one of my co-founders, Frank Furman, and our head of marketing and PR at the time, talking around this really fancy government table with Secretary Carson and all sorts of other people in suits, kind of going through it. And at one point, apparently, the HUD secretary said, "This could be millions of units." At which point, you can imagine our reps in the room were like, "Yeah, that's that's kind of the point." So then we had that meeting. They sent thank yous. We sent thank yous. There were a couple follow-up questions, but as you might expect in most things government related, you just didn't hear anything for a long time. And then as they were, I don't know if there was any controversy beforehand. It's interesting because it's such a bipartisan solution, right? I mean, it is both reducing discrimination, creating access, and doesn't cost the government any money. And so there's usually a lot there for both parties to sink their teeth into and really run with. But it didn't really come to fruition until the change in power. And I think it was like January 21st that notice was. I mean, it was like the last. Yeah. Well, no, 2021. It was 2021. It started. Yeah, we started Convos in 2019. But yeah, it was 2021 January of 2021 when it came out. And then the Biden administration really kind of picked it up and continued to run with it. And effectively, all it says is look, shared housing is allowed for housing choice vouchers in every jurisdiction, and we rely on each local public housing authority to determine how they want to implement it if it's a solution that can be an appropriate use in their communities. And then the other part that it said that I really appreciated was that, oh, by the way, we recognize that HUD has its own definition of family, which is pretty expansive. And a lot of these local jurisdictions may have definitions of family or restrictions on the number of unrelated parties that live together that may violate fair housing. And if public housing authorities come across such regulations, they should report those instances to HUD. And you've started to see that build a little bit more. I made a comment, which I published on LinkedIn. You can see on the affirmatively furthering fair housing rule, which is the latest kind of salvo in that fair housing battle by the Biden administration. And they are potentially talking about leveraging federal funds that are currently sent to municipalities or counties for housing programs, and determining whether or not those jurisdictions may be eligible based on whether or not their policies and procedures affirmatively further fair housing. And so if I had my druthers, family definition would certainly be one that is included in there. and I hope it's something that they look at.
So I really want people to understand how big this is, because that was a lot. I'm so glad you told that story, and it's a great story. But I really want people to understand how big this is. So basically, U.S. Department for Housing and Urban Development comes out with a recommendation that does not expire, right? It's not like for the next 5 years. This is like, hey, indefinitely for all municipalities. We're basically saying you can now use federal funds, right? I think that's that's federal funds for co-living homes. Like that, first of all, that in and of itself is huge. And I tell people all the time, even if you don't use federal funds, just the fact that they're just giving it this huge endorsement is helping to pave the way for people to be like, oh, okay, this could work. I mean, I see this. I was at an affordable housing conference the other day in Asheville, North Carolina. And like someone was like, did you know? I was in the audience, but they were like, shared housing is like one of the newest things. And I think part of it is because of these things starting to come out. So that's one. And then the second piece that you're saying is basically they're saying, hey, I don't know how to put this in simple words, but basically they're saying a single family, like this stuff should be able to be used for multiple people living in one house and still be considered single family.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, if you look at HUD's definition of family, it is essentially any group of people who choose to live together. Right.
That's great.
Yeah. There's a question around, I mean, and listen, this gets onto all sorts of social issues as well, but here we are in 2023, and for whatever reason, we're still defining family based on county or city lines. I mean, it's absolutely insane where you can walk across the street and here family is 6 unrelated people, and then you go across the street and it's 2 unrelated people, but it doesn't include your grandparents, but it does include your domestic servants. Like, it's just like, yeah, it's mind-boggling. And so I have yet to hear a compelling reason as to why jurisdictions need to legislate family on a local level and why they cannot adopt HUD's methodology, because building codes still exist, y'all. Like, it's still a thing. Like, you still have occupancy restrictions. You still have, fire egress, fire code restrictions on single family homes. All of these things are still present. And I'm sure you've run enough of these properties to recognize people always assume that, oh, in co-living you have more adults, so it's going to be more wear and tear. Like, forgive my French, but that's bullshit. And anybody who's ever run it, like, you can see it, because if you have been operating a property for any extent of time, you can recognize that in a traditional single-family rental or multifamily scenario, when your ability to kind of get any visual read inside the property ends at the front door, like, you don't have any idea what's happening. And like, listen, I've had some $46,000 insurance claims on single-family rental turns. Like, that was what pushed me into co-living. So.
I have to interject this. I was literally on a call today, Atticus, and a guy was like, I ran a single-family rental. And a guy started running a strip club, I swear to you, in his house. And he didn't find out for like 5 months. And it was like they had like not only destroyed the house, but like reworked it and all this stuff.
I have a picture on my Facebook feed of a house and an apartment that had, stripper pole, mirrored glass all the way around. Like, two separate occasions, Sam. So, yeah, that stuff was real. Like,
so this is a segue into how do you, and I really want to address this because it's one of the most common questions I get. And if I'm talking to a sophisticated investor, I'm talking an accredited investor, this is probably the number one pushback I get. And I know I have accredited investors that will be listening to this. So the number one pushback I'm going to get is, yeah, okay, Sam, you can convince me that you can do this. You can add bathrooms, you can add bedrooms. Like, I get that. Like, usually people can at least wrap their head around that. But what about regulations? How do I go spend all this money in single family homes, create it to the co-living / Padsplit model, and then like the zoning department's going to come knocking on my door and kick me out? And so I want to hear, like, high level, what are the strategies you use to overcome that now at 6,700 rooms. And I do want to say this, I did have a meeting, this was probably a month or two ago, with Charlie, your head legal counsel, and love him, by the way. He's awesome. I did not know he was the head legal counsel for NRA before this. I was like, yes, I'm in the South. Let's go. And so let's go. Oh, it was Glock, not NRA. Got it. Okay. And he was like, I said, like, well, how many times have you been shut down? He's like, look, we've had to make adjustments, but we've never been shut down. And I was like, dude, that's so cool and such a great thing. And I even wanted to say that on this podcast because, that's a fear, and I'm literally, I know I'm on my webinar tonight is with Brandon Turner. I think you'll have several thousand people on, and I'm going to talk about this conversation. And like, I know that's one of the first questions I'm going to get, like, what about regulations? And I'm going to talk about this with the Padsplit head legal counsel. So how do you get around it? What are, and we could go into, I know the weeds super deep on this, but if we just keep it high level for people so they can wrap their head around how you're dealing with that, I'd love for them to hear that directly from you.
So the short answer is you want to make sure that your house is one of the nicest looking ones on the block. Like that's just base case, because guess what? If you are the worst looking house on the block, I don't really care how much legal justification you have. You're probably going to have a really hard time. And code enforcement is going to be knocking on your door if your grass is not cut and your garage door is falling off the hinges or off the rollers and you got 5 cars parked in the grass. Like, it's going to happen. So don't be that guy is number one. And 99.5% of all of your regulatory issues will be addressed through your operations. And everyone intrinsically knows this already, in that if you go on Craigslist in your hometown, like pick a city in America, and you go on Craigslist and you look on rooms shared, you're going to find a lot of listings. Okay. And how many of those listings do you think have ever had any regulatory issues, in spite of the fact that they may be terrible? They may be terribly run. And so there's only so much capacity to be able to address the issue is the first answer to the question. So the better your operations, like roommates share all the time. Elderly people share all the time. And so it's not that sharing is necessarily a problem. It's a problem when it's a problem, right? It's a problem when your neighbors complain. And so how can you run a professional home where your neighbors are not going to complain, and establish relationships so that when they have a problem, they know to call you and you can address it, or they call your property management company and they will address it in a prompt and professional manner. Like, that is, like, forget about any sort of regulatory stuff, fix the operational stuff. And I mean, spitting on the sidewalk is illegal in lots of municipal jurisdictions. Like, how many times do people get arrested for spitting on the sidewalk? It just doesn't happen. But when it comes to the legal questions themselves, you make it clear in any time that there is a fight that you have done all that you can and then some to address the substantive issues that are impacting your neighbors or the community. Because if you have a problem house that is affecting your neighbors, it doesn't matter what that regulatory is, they're going to come after you. But so long as you have one of the nicer looking homes on the block, if you have a regulation that says, oh, well, no more than such and such number of people are allowed to live together, in those cases you fight, right? And that's what we do. And I think a big value add to the Padsplit platform is to say, look, if this is a zoning question, we got you, and we will fight that fight on your behalf. Now, there are cases where owners say, you know what, I don't want to deal with this, and I'm out. And so those cases, like, they'll do something else, and hopefully they have a portfolio that's big enough where you say, all right, well, if we've got a 2% risk where we have to convert 2% of homes to single family, then you take it as a business proposition and an actuarial risk on a go forward basis. But the reality is, like, we fight, and there are real constitutional protections in place where if someone is saying you can have a virtually unlimited number of related people living in this home that are qualified as a single family, but there is a limit on the number of unrelated people, that are allowed to live in the single family home, despite the fact that it is the exact same home. There are real constitutional protections at play. You've got due process, you've got equal protections, you've got fair housing. And any time that we've gotten in front of a judge with those grounds and the actual use cases, the judge typically will look at the solicitor and say, well, tell me about those substantive issues. Tell me about the grass not being cut. Tell me about the paint peeling or the cars parked. Like, because you know what? As a judge, very rarely does somebody want to dive into how do you define a family? And how do you justify that in a 1,000 square foot home, there is no limit to the number of related people that can be in there under zoning? It's different building code, but under zoning code. Whereas if it were a 10,000 square foot home, in many jurisdictions, you're limited to 2 unrelated people. That doesn't logically flow for anyone who thinks very deeply about this problem, and certainly not a judge sitting on the bench. And so if you are willing to take a case to that level, we don't lose those, and we haven't lost one yet. And I think it's pretty apparent as to why. And there are a number of local cases around the country where cities have tried to enforce unrelated parties laws. Just go on ChatGPT and ask for legal zoning cases on unrelated parties where cities have been ruled against, and you'll find several of them
where the cities have actually been ruled against.
Correct.
Yes, that's great, man. Yes, thank you for your fight in that category. I think it is really cool to point out for anybody listening that if you're using Padsplit as a platform, you guys will take that fight up, so the owner of that house does not. That's a huge value add, man. Like just to say, hey, you're on our platform, like we'll fight that battle for you. I mean, that's such a peace of mind for someone going into an area and listing their homes on your platform. So I love that. That's awesome. I hope people really hear that. Couple of rapid fire questions for you, man, as we wrap this up. One is, what advice would you have to investors who are looking at this as an investment vehicle? Let's just say someone's on here and they like the social entrepreneur aspect of this, but it's not the biggest thing. Like they want to make a return on their money. And so compared to multifamily, compared to fixing and flipping, compared to Airbnb is a big one I get right now because that's all the rage with smaller investors. What advice do you have for someone who's weighing maybe those vehicles to invest in that I just shared against co-living?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think there are certain use cases and markets for each of those. The first is to understand your market and understand what your strategy is and whether you're looking for something very active. And Airbnbs, I think it's fair to say, are
super active.
The most active of those three.
Yes.
And in single family, arguably are the least active of those three. And we're probably somewhere in the middle. And so that's the first thing, is just be realistic with yourself with what you want to take on and how you want to roll. From a dollars per dollars standpoint, again, it's still, I mean, a beachfront pad split is not going to be competitive with a beachfront vacation home. Hopefully I don't have to say that, but I'll put it out there anyway. Last week, though, we did have a graduate school group from the Georgia Tech Business School that actually compared our core markets with average Airbnb earnings for the same houses as average Padsplit earnings, and we won in 4 out of 5 cases. So
let's go.
So once you account for all of the costs involved, and especially if you put any dollars on your time, then it can be very, very competitive.
Look, man, and just to send this point home, let me interject that I have 8 luxury Airbnbs in the Asheville and Charlotte area, and I have a team of 1, 2, 3. I have a team of 4. 2 of them are virtual assistants, but 2 stateside full-timers, and 4. I basically have 4 people that run those plus 4 other ones we manage. So call it 12 Airbnbs, right? And for 160 doors, I have 2 full-time people on the co-living side. Like, it just doesn't even compare, the volume of work and complaints. And so I just want to send that point home. Keep going, but yeah.
No, it's been our experience as well. And I think today, given, I know a lot of Airbnb investors have seen just a lack of demand or increase in regulation, where it really is difficult, and you certainly don't have the same moral or ethical argument to maintain a vacation rental as you do for essential workers. And so regulation is a real question or a real concern in a lot of those cases. And then for single family rentals, you're underwater on debt right now. And so we've seen a ton of tailwinds from this frozen, arguably terrible capital market over the last couple months, simply because we are roughly double the NOI, the net operating income of single family rentals. So you're still positive leverage. You can go out and get debt that is lower than what you're going to earn on a non-leveraged basis. And we haven't had the same issues either with demand or regulatory that a lot of people have been really frustrated with Airbnb. So I think that's probably about the size of it right now. The one other thing I would add in there is I hear the same thing right now about multifamily. Oh, well, I've been doing single family for a while. I need to go do multi. I'll tell you what, when I started doing single family in early 2008, and then I had the exact same thought. We're like, oh, let's go do multi. And my business partner, longtime business partner, in my first company, which is still operating, he said, look, apartments are a business disguised as real estate. And it's like all of the work of co-living without the benefit. You're just at a much lower cap rate. And of course, the debt markets now are pretty tough. But yeah, if you're thinking about like a 12 to 50 unit apartment complex, those are really hard to run. And I can speak from personal experience there.
Yeah. And look, it was, I don't know if you've heard this, but I was watching a little clip by Warren Buffett the other day, and he literally was saying, he goes, guys, I can't, he said, I literally do not have the same advantages as someone getting a 30-year mortgage on a home. He was basically like touting the benefit of a 30-year mortgage. He's like, that's unheard of. He's like, in the capital markets that I'm playing in, this Warren Buffett was saying this. He's like, it would be, and he used some very technical language that I didn't understand. He's like, that would be like this, this, and this. And he's like, I could never do that. Like getting a 30-year mortgage is one of the best investment vehicles from a debt standpoint ever. And so when I'm buying homes, I'm always getting 30-year. I'm getting 30-year fixed mortgages on homes. Like, and all the multifamily guys are getting stuff locked for 4 or 5 or 5 to 7 to 10. And like some of those are starting to come due now. And we're just starting to see some of that pain of like my interest rate was 3.1 and now it's 5.5. Do that on $10 million.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, multifamily has the industry in a lot of ways has kind of been built on the greater fool theory. It's like, all right, well, you aggregate this set of properties, you're buying at a 7 cap and you're underwriting to sell at a 5 in 2 to 3 years, and everybody needs a payoff. But dirty little secret, a lot of those properties don't cash flow. And unless you just trend rents up and up and up. So whenever you see a dip, kind of like what we see now, and especially in the last crash, there's a day of reckoning. And when you have that day of reckoning, sure, a lot of people can plow in again and really do extremely well very quickly. But yeah, it's as much credit instrumentation as it is real estate.
Yes. Well said.
Yeah.
Well said.
Dangerous game.
Yeah. So there you go, guys. Sam and Atticus are huge multifamily fans. Just do multifamily in a single family. in a single family.
Yeah, exactly. Right? Exactly. If you're looking, at least if you're looking for cash flow, right? If you think there's a greater fool out there that you can sell at a cap rate, fine, go do your thing. But yeah, if you're looking for cash flow, it's the jam.
Yeah, I love it, man. The last thing I want to chat with you about, you've been so generous with your time. We'll kind of wrap up with this, is I wrote it down in my notes. Like, I want to talk, and we do not have to go super deep in this for time's sake. I want to keep it a little shorter, but just your model, because I talk to people about this a lot. I get this question a lot, is people will ask, like, okay, when I talk to Padsplit or when I talk to you, it seems like who you're going after is different. So when people talk to me, I'm saying, hey, like a lot of who I'm targeting with my co-living communities is I'm targeting young professionals or just out of college. Maybe they have debt. And I'm almost staying away, for lack of a better way to say it, like I'm almost staying away from someone who, let's say, was just homeless or was just recently homeless. Whereas like everything in this conversation, like you're really like, that's the mission you're here to solve, right? And so maybe just talk really briefly about kind of how you see that. I know you and I have had some fun banter about back and forth about who's our clientele. And I'm like, hey, no, we need to go after the more bougie crowd and create community and have these events. And you're like, no, Sam, like just do clean, quiet, and safe, and this thing will scale. Look, truth is, I'm at $160 and you're at 6,700. So you're somebody's doing a lot better than I am right here. But my point in saying that is, I've still kind of chosen in my niche to go after that. I even had a guy today tell me he's got a guy living in his home. He's like, the dude's a millionaire. Like he just loves, like they do barbecue every Saturday. And so these are kind of some of the stories that fuel me and what I go after is creating this community. And the truth is, it comes from like, that's my story. Like I lived in co-living houses for 13 years and I wasn't poor or lower on the socioeconomic scale. I was just like, I just raised his 8 kids, brothers and sisters, and like didn't like it being quiet in my house. So rented out all my rooms and then thought it was great because I was making money. So like that was kind of my story. So it just naturally fits that I just went on to kind of market to the same type of people like I was, young professional, not married, was making decent money in my job, and then, on. But that's a little different than yours. So if you could just talk for a brief minute about how that's different, maybe how you see me versus you, and anything you want to just share around that to give an investor a perspective on how they should think about who they're marketing to with these co-living houses.
Yeah, I think the first thing I'll say is from our last conversation, we've grown certainly, and we've seen a number of interesting use cases where individual hosts have created their own brand. That's not dissimilar from yours to run through the Padsplit platform, but are catering a different audience, and largely that's just driven by price. But the tools that we provide for the demand aggregation, payments processing, collections, and the communication technology tools and whatnot, rating systems, accountability measures, they're the same, right? It's the same set of tools that are needed to run this business, regardless of whether you're talking about an affordable customer or kind of a lifestyle customer. And we started to see more of those lifestyle customers using the site recently. But at the end of the day, I mean, for me, it comes down to, all right, we're kind of headed towards or in the middle of another down cycle. What has staying power? And as long as you can be the most affordable option in any given area, you're always going to have demand. You're going to have customers. If you can make a business around that lowest common denominator on pricing and actually earn a return, you're always going to have a business. And so practically, it just boils down to that from an investor's perspective. And then for me personally, and more on the social impact side, it's just like, hey, do we believe in this country that someone who's working full time should be able to afford a place to live? Well, I certainly do. And unfortunately, that's not true. So what has to exist in order to make that true? And how do you create a product that makes that true? And so I think that's really where we focus on the meat and potatoes of whether you want to call it housing or flexible living or co-living. It's just what are the baseline standards that someone should expect, and how do you hold folks accountable to those baseline standards? And it's still really hard. I think listen, our business is not an easy one, as I'm sure you can relate at any level. But so long as you can produce that safe, clean, quiet home, you're going to continue to have customers over and over and over and over. Especially if, any shared home is likely to be the most affordable in any given market, at least on a market rate basis.
Yeah. That's beautiful. Thanks for sharing your perspective on that. And men, thank you. Thank you for being on. Thanks for your time. Thanks for sharing your wisdom. I always love getting inside your brain and just figuring out how you're thinking. So here's to one foot in front of the other. And where do you think you'll be in a year, man? Like in a year when I get you back on, you're at 6,700 rooms.
Well, let's hope we're past 12. Let's hope we're
Let's
past
go.
12.
All right, we're doubling it up in a year. Atticus, it's been a pleasure. I really appreciate it, buddy. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sam.